Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, you know when you have been speaking a language for some time and you start to get comfortable speaking and having conversations, you kind of start to wonder at one point, well, you know, I keep saying this one thing, and I've got used to saying that one thing, and I am pretty sure that native speakers don't say it exactly like that. Have you ever had that experience? It happens to me all the time, and it's a very well-known phenomenon called fossilisation. If you think about a fossil, something that used to live but then died and got sort of stuck in time for hundreds of thousands of years, well, the same thing happens with our languages. Because, well, you know, we can't always be aware of all the mistakes that we're making, and so mistakes can become set in stone. This is the topic of today's question. Here is today's question.
Hi, Olly. What's up? This is Matthias. I'm a German teacher. And first of all, I want to say thanks so much for producing this podcast. Your episodes have been a massive help for all of my lessons. I've listened to every single one of them and really keep up the great work. So today I have a question for you about the topic fossilization. That's a scientific term for a topic which basically means, you know, when students, especially in the early stages of their language learning careers, they have been more learning by themselves really, and without really professional help, and thus they have kind of acquired a really bad accent, and in the following years they've been kind of using that accent, haven't really changed anything, and then they come to me or they come to a language teacher, and the first thing you notice is that the accent is really bad, and you actually would need to start over with pronunciation classes in which you talk about really the individual sounds and like tongue movements and stuff. But the thing is, those students have been learning for such a long time, and I've tried it a couple of times and it didn't really work out a lot because it's fossilized. All of the patterns and bad habits are fossilized in their brains, in their memories. So I don't know. Have you personally experienced that problem in one of your languages? And how would you tackle that if one of your students came to you with that problem? So it would be awesome if you could talk a little bit about the topic fossilization, and looking forward to that episode, and thank you so much.
Hi, Matthias. Thank you very much for your question, and I appreciate you being such a conscientious teacher as well. It's great to know that there are teachers out there who are taking such an active interest in helping their students improve and finding new ways and possible solutions as a teacher to do that. It's really important. You know, all of us, whether we've been teaching for 6 months or 6 years, or we've been learning languages for 6 months or 6 years, the thing that defines us as professionals, in my view, is the fact that we are always learning and we're always trying to improve. So good job. I also appreciate your comments about the podcast. It's wonderful to hear that you've been back and listened to every single podcast. The first few podcasts are pretty bad, I think. But hey, we have to start somewhere, right? And for everyone listening, you know, if you haven't gone back and listened to the old podcasts, go back and listen to the first 5 or 10 episodes. You'll hear that I'm kind of sounding nervous and don't really know what to say. And it's just like language learning. Same thing happens. You start off not knowing what you're doing, but eventually you get better with practice. But the most important thing is that you get started and you try. So fossilization, we introduced it a little bit in the intro to today's episode, and I want to pick up on a couple of things you said, Matthias. First of all, you asked me if I have ever experienced this in my languages, and the answer is yes, I have, many, many times. And the way that I've gone about solving it is generally through making myself as aware as possible of the different errors that I'm creating, that I'm committing. Now, the key word here is awareness. And this comes back to a point that you made at the beginning of your question, which is that many students come to you who have never had professional help with languages, with German in your case, right? So they've studied by themselves, and they've made all these errors, and now they're coming to you because they want to improve them. Now, here's the thing. You don't necessarily need professional help in order to develop in order to develop a good accent. I mean, let's talk specifically about accent here, Matthias, because that's what you were referring to. Mistakes can fossilize in all areas of language, from grammar to vocabulary as well. But it's perfectly possible to become completely fluent in a language without ever taking lessons or having professional help. I think the difference is, and this is a kind of a symptom of this, is the fact that you in general have language learners who are aware and language learners who are not aware. One of my strengths as a language learner, such as it is that I consider myself quite aware of language issues. So I'm aware of how I sound when I pronounce words. I'm aware of the grammar that I'm using, and I actively go out of my way to pay attention to these different areas of language learning in order to improve them. Now, many people are not like this. I would think that most people that listen to this podcast are like that because, you're listening to the podcast, which means you've taken the step to actually decide that you want to improve your language learning in the first place. And most of what we talk about here is about, ways to improve as an independent learner. But, it's very, very common that I will meet people who have been learning languages, one language for 5, 10, 20 years, and they still have a pretty bad accent, or they still commit some pretty basic errors in their grammar. And the reason that I think that the fact that they still make these mistakes, and the fact that they've never gone for professional lessons before, it's all a symptom of the fact that of a lack of awareness. Because if you want to become aware, if you have this desire to become aware, you can figure out how to do it. And sometimes you can do it by yourself. Other times you go to a teacher and you can say, "Look, can you help me?" You can ask what areas you need to improve in, and then based on what the teacher tells you, you can become aware. So it's awareness, 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 awareness. I think for a teacher, this is very difficult. When I was teaching in Japan, I would often have so-called advanced students who were in an advanced class, but their English was nothing like advanced. The only reason they were there was because the school had to keep moving them up a level each year in order to keep them on as students. So you got pretty intermediate level student in an advanced class, and I would often resign myself to the fact of, look, these guys have been learning now for 20 years. Are they really going to start to unlearn these mistakes? I don't like saying that in a way, because you have to as teachers, we want to believe that everything is fixable, right, and everything is improvable. But you see, often fossilization doesn't actually affect meaning that much. So take English learners, for example. One of the very commonly fossilized grammar errors you'll hear is you'll get English students saying "it's mean" rather than "it means." English will say "it means," "it means this," "it means that," but learners will often say "it's mean this," "it's mean that," because it's that problem with that redundant third person s, right? Means. It doesn't tell you anything useful. You also have, in terms of word order or question formation, people will ask you, why you have why you go to work, or why you have 2 books, or whatever, instead of why do you have? Because that "do" again is redundant. So why you have. The thing about these 2 errors is that it doesn't affect meaning. I still understand everything they say. And in terms of pronunciation, there are loads of Italians in London who put very strong emphasis on the final syllable of a word. So instead of saying house, they'll say house. Instead of saying have, they'll say have. And it marks them out as it's very, very distinctively Italian, but it doesn't affect communication. I can still understand what they mean. And so often fossilization doesn't really affect communication. And so you have to think as a teacher, what is the marginal utility of trying really hard to correct these fossilized mistakes? In other words, what's it going to take for me to correct this particular problem, and is it worth it? And this is a compromise because, like I say, we don't want to think this necessarily. But when someone's been doing the same thing for 5-10 years, like reprogramming them is extremely difficult. Now, assuming that you want to do that, and in your case, Matthias, you want to fix these German learners' pronunciation, it has to come back to awareness. So, often, I think if a student comes to you, and you see this often in students that go to language schools in general, there's always a risk that what they are doing is they're trying to delegate the solution, right? So they know that their pronunciation is not great, and so they're trying to delegate it. They say, okay, if I find a teacher and pay the teacher, they will sort this out for me. But the thing to instill in them is that, look, you are I'm the teacher, I can guide you, but you are the one that's learnt this wrong in the first place. Only you can unlearn it. And you have to send the problem right back to them and say, like, okay, you are the one that has to sort this out. I can show you some exercises to help you become aware of this. I can do my best to raise your awareness, but you have to take ownership of this problem. So in terms of how to do that, I think as a teacher, you've got the choice of going the hard way or the soft way. And it depends really how the student will react to either path that you take. So what I often found when I was teaching is the reality of many learning situations is that people are just learning for fun. So if you go too hard on them and you really drill them down to the ground with their pronunciation, they're going to stop enjoying it and they're going to quit. And nobody wants that. So it may be that you have to take the easier path. And the easier path is doing things like basically just pointing it out. Let's say that they have a particular problem. They have a problem with a particular sound in German. Maybe they can't pronounce it. Ich. I don't know what they'd say instead. But what you can do in your conversations is every time they say ich wrong or unnaturally, maybe you have a signal. Maybe you hold up a card, or maybe you hold up your hand, or maybe you to stop them and point it out. You just gently raise their awareness of the fact that they are making an error, or you're gently raising their awareness of the fact that that this thing has happened again, and you just have to kind of hope that after a certain number of times doing this, after pointing it out to them enough times, that they will pick it up by themselves. Now, this sometimes happens and sometimes it doesn't. So I think the solution in many cases is to not try to do it on the spot in lessons, but actually set them activities to help with awareness raising at home. I heard Sam Harris say recently that people like to change their minds in private, and this is mostly pertains to like political views and things like that. But the point is, nobody likes to be, even in a lesson with a teacher, nobody likes to be shown up. Nobody likes to have someone demonstrate that they're making tons of mistakes. And so I might think, in your case, Matthias, I might start to think about, well, what kind of awareness-raising activities can you set students to do at home so that in the privacy of their own home, when there's no teacher watching them and judging them and there's no pressure on, how can you set them activities that allow them to become aware of the errors that they're making in their pronunciation? And that's probably going to have something to do with recording themselves speaking, listening back to it, comparing with other recordings, whatever you can do to get them to really engage with the particular problem that you're trying to fix. And then in the lessons, following up with that. So, if you decide to work on one particular sound, then set them activities to do at home. The heavy lifting, if you like, the main work needs to be done at home in their own time. Learning doesn't happen in lessons. Learning happens at home. In the lesson, that's when you need to kind of guide them back and check on their progress and see how they've been getting on. But fossilization is such a difficult thing to address that your only hope of doing it is to put the onus on them to fix it. And I think to the extent that you can do that, you will find some success with that. All right, so I hope that's helpful. Hopefully that's given you a way of thinking about the problem, at least. And best of luck to you. Let me know how you get on. If you'd like to leave me a question, like Matthias did, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. In order to do that, we have a queue of questions, but I will answer every question that comes in, providing it's not a repeat of a question that's come up recently. Because, especially questions like, can you learn 2 languages at the same time? We've answered that so many times now, I probably won't answer a similar question unless you give me a very specific situation. So if you want to guarantee that I answer your question, be as specific as possible. Let me know about your own personal situation. That would be the best thing to do. All right, now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with something to chew on. And so I'd like to leave you with this quote that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, because I think it's very important, and it has ramifications that are far wider than language learning, but has a lot to do with the world that we live in these days, where everybody's disagreeing with each other, polarized opinions, echo chambers, and all that. Which is this quote from Sam Harris, which is, "People like to change their minds in private." So remember that next time you're having a discussion with somebody who maybe doesn't agree with you. It's not that they could never agree with you; it's just that they are more likely to do it on their own term, in their own time. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast. We've got some very exciting things coming up in the next few weeks, guys, so stay tuned.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.